A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So, what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Moshe Abudarham. He is the founder of Mamba Freelancer. Moshe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you, James?
I am fantastic. So, Moshe, I think we connected a few weeks ago. Turns out we have a lot of mutual connections with Gaetano from Sales Hacker, a bunch of other marketing folks that we realized that we all knew whenever we hopped on a call a couple of weeks ago. But the reason that I'm really excited to chat with you today is, one, what you're doing with Mamba Freelancer, I think is super intriguing. During our conversation a couple of weeks ago, realized how much of an expert you were in the art of creating compelling case studies. And I've heard, there's not a marketer in the world that would tell you that case studies aren't one of, arguably the highest converting asset that they can create. And so I think everyone knows how important they are, but you actually have a really cool methodology for how to go about creating them and a really unique perspective. I think we'll get into kind of that more, but first, can you tell us, Moshe, what is Mamba Freelancer all about? What are you and your team doing? And then we'll dive into the art of writing really compelling case studies.
Right. So thank you for that intro. Mamba Freelancer is a curated network of MA and MBA quality freelancers and consultants for discerning marketers, salespeople, and executives. And we focus on providing, best-in-class content marketing, product marketing, sales enablement, and thought leadership.
Love it. And so you really are curating where there are a lot of sites like Fiverr and Upwork that don't have nearly as much intentionality around quality of the freelancers on the platform. You are very picky about who you allow to be in your freelance network because they have to have, an MA or an MBA. Is that correct?
Yes, they have to have an MA or an MBA, or at least be judged to be that quality. And they need to have worked in content marketing or the other disciplines for a certain number of years before I'll let them on the platform. And I've been in content marketing for 8 years with some overlap into the other disciplines. And so I'm sort of the judge and arbiter as to whether they are good enough to meet my standards, which hopefully means that they are exceeding my client's standards.
I love it. I love the concept and your eye for quality. I think is, speaks for itself. And we're going to get into a lot of your background. So as we dive into talking about case studies, you have done, over 100 case studies over the last 8 years for 3 different companies. And you've learned, obviously, and when you do that much of anything, you're going to learn an enormous amount about it. As we dive into this interview, Moshe, I'd love for you to explain, why should the person listening to this write a case study?
Right. So a case study, first, if we think where the case study goes and what it's used for, that will really explain the why. So in content marketing, as a lot of the listeners will know, you have the top, the middle, and the bottom of the funnel. of the sales funnel and the marketing funnel before that. And case studies, the reason why it converts so well is because it sits in between the middle, the bottom, and the marketing funnel and the beginning of the sales funnel into the sales funnel. So case studies are used as that sort of last step, last touch on what I believe is nowadays an average 14 pieces of content before someone gets in touch with sales. And it's also a great way if a potential customer has or hasn't read the case study, it's great for sales enablement. And what I found is that it's especially good for the salespeople that you're putting out into the field at events and conferences. And the reason why you write a case study is because it's excellent social proof. If you think of a testimonial that is considered quite a good thing to have on your homepage or your website, and to have more of them across your website and different social media, this is like a testimonial expanded, and it has a certain structure and story to it that really gives across the value of your business to a particular customer. And it allows prospects to see what value you could give to their business if they engage your services or used your products.
All right. So the next question, Moshe, now that we understand the why, the next question is, are you ready to write a case study? And as we were talking about this offline, you mentioned that a lot of people kind of jump right into it long before they're ready. So what's the benchmark that you use to determine whether or not somebody's ready to write one of these or not?
Right. So if we take Mamba Freelancer, which is my nascent company, you're going to, it's too early in the process for me to do studies about my clients. We've been up and running for about 6 months. And although I've got a lot of experience and my freelancers have a lot of experience, as Mamba Freelancer, we're not ready to tell a particular story because the story has to have a relationship and it has to have significant results. If there aren't significant results yet, then it's not really worth writing it because you're not proving anything. You want to prove that the relationship can be established, developed, and lead to results for the client or the customer.
Love it. And so you see the mistake happening where, somebody's 6 months in and they're just not giving enough time to establish that relationship. So they're pulling the trigger too early and they're ultimately just not telling a compelling enough story.
Yes, so there's that mistake, and then there's the fact that some companies, probably because of that mistake, they put out a case study that is just design, no story, and it just says problem solution, and that's not really enough for a case study. Case study is as I said, it's the relationship and what they achieved and what they're going to achieve next. And to really tell a story about that, you need a little bit longer than 6 months. Working together to make it interesting and make it do what it's meant to do, which is attract new customers and new prospects.
So now we've talked about kind of the why behind a case study. We talked about how you determine whether or not you're ready to write a case study or not. This next piece we're going to talk about is really just how do you define what a case study is?
Okay, so for me, a case study, the minimum is the 2 parties involved. Sometimes you could have more than one party, although I prefer to leave multi-party case studies for use cases where you're looking at how a few different parties worked with the commissioning company to grow their business or to solve a problem in their business. So the first thing is you need to have 2 parties involved. You can't just say, we do this, we do this, we do this. You have to say, we do this for this company that was experiencing that problem. The idea of a case study is to make both sides look good. So if you get business for the subject company, that's great. That should be a bonus for the company that's commissioning the case study. And as I said before, we're looking at the relationship, how it developed, and the results.
Awesome. So now I really want to get into the nuts and bolts of what belongs in the actual case study. So this next part of the interview, we're really going to dive deep into like what are the sections of a case study. Walk us through what each of those are.
Right. So the first section, and this is a little bit counterintuitive, but we really need to introduce the customer or the client before we start telling the story. And I think most companies commissioning case studies, they would jump in right to what they do, what they offer, and there's no context as to what the client or customer does. and what they're trying to achieve. It may be like a target as to we were targeting this result, but without understanding the background of the client or customer, it doesn't make for a good story.
Got it.
It makes for a good ABC, but A needs to be developed, C needs to be developed before it is really considered a proper story.
Got it. Do you have a amount of, like, how long should that section be, like, about the client?
Right. So usually a case study is 2 sides of a PDF, the sort of thing you can hand out at an event, the sort of thing that a prospect can read within, say, 10, 20 minutes and go away and think about it for longer and try and apply it to their own situation. And so once we've written about the client, we then have to expose the problem that the client was having. So, for example, when I used to work for UK Trade and Investment, I did a case study, which I thought at the time was one of the less interesting case studies, although you'll understand in a minute why it may have become one of the more interesting case studies I ever did. We were doing a case study on Amazon, UK Trade and Investment, who were helping Amazon, an American company, come and establish roots in the UK. And they were actually, I forget if it's Glasgow or Edinburgh, I think it was Edinburgh. They were trying to find a suitable location in the UK, turned out to be Scotland, that would allow them to land and expand their Amazon services, of which now that we know there are many, in the UK. And the focus was fulfillment services. So the gist of the case study was that they found an old building, and in the UK, old buildings are actually nicer buildings. They've got a little bit of class and history to them. So they found, I think it was the post office building in Edinburgh, beautiful ornate building out of stone. And they wanted to find a location that was close to transportation hubs so that any of their executives could come in and fly in and be able to be, a train away from the fulfillment center. They also wanted a place with a good talent pool and a labor pool so that they could find managers all the way down through to fulfillment personnel. And we now know, having seen how much Amazon's grown to one of the biggest companies in the world, that this is actually fulfillment is quite central to their growth. And they have better fulfillment than most other online shopping services. So they chose this post office building in Edinburgh. They took it over and they turned it into a fulfillment center. And so we were trying to expose part of the problem of what they needed, and that's the sort of thing I've just been describing. That's actually the second part of a case study. Is we've talked about the client, so we explained about Amazon. Then we exposed the problem that they needed this ideal location for a fulfillment center with the talent around, with the travel hubs around, and then we start to talk about the relationship. So The relationship is between Amazon and the team at UK Trade and Investment that was helping them to find the best location.
And how long do you suggest elaborating? What are the different facets of the relationship that need to be communicated?
Okay, so for example, did they consider alternative solutions to going and getting advice from UK Trade and Investment? Or when I was writing case studies for SmartLink or for PathGather, did they consider other translation technologies or other translation techniques when we're talking about SmartLink? And for PathGather, did they consider other learning management systems before they stumbled upon or found PathGather as a talent development platform? So we also talk a little bit about how they became connected in the first place. Who introduced Amazon to UK Trade and Investment as the ideal partner to give them advice about where to find things in the UK and where best to doing the research and where best to place their fulfillment center. Edinburgh for an American company wouldn't necessarily be the most obvious choice. As it happened, when they looked through multiple cities, it made the most sense for them. And also why Amazon chose UK Trade Investment, why HP or Visa or T-Mobile chose PathGather to be their talent development platform, why they chose a talent development platform instead of a more basic traditional learning management system. So we want to let the reader of the case study understand, have an eye into the thought process as to why the company commissioning the case study was chosen instead of other solutions or other possibilities.
Got it. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So you've now got a section about the client. You've got a section that exposes the problem. You've got a section that explains the context of the different relationships, how they found out about you, the depth of the relationship. And then this next section, you talk about the results that have been achieved. I think a lot of people kind of want to jump to this, but this is kind of fourth on your list. Talk to us about this section.
Yes. So this is literally the fourth section of the case study. And we talk about the experience that was had with UK Trade Investment or with Smiling or with Pathgather that is after the decision has been made. So that might mean that we're talking about a particular dedicated support that was given, that maybe it was a 6-month process and a lot of meetings. Maybe in UK Trade and Investments case, maybe they had recommended outside parties to get them involved, consultancy firms, etc. And that leads to the results achieved. And as you say, you don't just jump right to the results achieved. You need to give that context first, because otherwise the reader of the case study is not able to understand the step from reading the case study all the way through to achieving those results. And the results achieved, this comes back to the, are you ready to write a case study? If you don't have results, then there's a major factor missing. So although a lot of people start with the results, and I've said that we really need to lay the groundwork and tell the story behind those results, you still need the right results. And results are best given over as a quantifiable number. So it may be a dollar figure, a pound figure. It might be a percentage growth, percentage of people signing up instead of what they had before, who's signing up, who's become customers. It may, in certain circumstances, be what the results allow them to achieve later. And that brings me to the last part of the fourth section, which sometimes is its own paragraph, is what's next for the client. So, for example, with Amazon, being able to land and expand into Europe and via the UK, that allowed them to then go and explore other hubs around Europe and really expand their network of fulfillment centers. So it's very interesting to say what's next for the client or the customer, because it's not just what they achieved with the company that's commissioning the case study, it's what else is coming after that.
Got it. Okay. And do you see a lot of people missing that part where they don't share what's next?
Yes. I see a lot of companies that just put a number, which is great. You need a number or a percentage of change or growth, but they miss of what results that result helped them to achieve.
Got it. All right. So this last section of the interview, Moshe, we're going to talk about additional elements that you need to include. And this is really where I think this particular episode is going to be a masterclass, setting itself apart from other pieces of content that tell you how to create a case study, because this is, as you were talking through each of these additional elements, I just thought, man, this is so smart, and things that I can imagine people just don't think through. So the first additional element that needs to be included in a case study, you say, is fast facts. Can you talk to us about what these are and where should that be incorporated into the case study?
Yes. So right at the top of the case study, the fast facts is your case study equivalent to what we've seen a lot online lately of the TLDR, too long didn't read. And you've got to think that you want a decision maker to be reading this case study, right? We're all targeting decision makers, be it in marketing, be it in sales. We all want to get through to the decision makers, or at least one of a group of decision makers. So they don't have a lot of time. We've got to be respectful of their time. And if you have 6 case studies and they're trying to choose one of them, the fast facts would be able to tell you the name of the company, the industry that they're in, make the size of the company perhaps, so that someone from T-Mobile could look at a HP case study that we did for Pathgather and say, great, this is an enterprise company with X thousand, X tens of thousands of employees. They're a brand name. Okay, we now know that Pathgather has now actually been acquired by Degrees recently. Congratulations to them and the team over there. But Pathgather was the technology and the team was suitable to handle enterprise customers. So these fast facts, the TLDR of a case study, is very important. It should be right up top. And usually next to some sort of design or imagery or a photograph. And when it comes to the imagery, you may not think about it, but you don't want to just put a person, and you don't want to just put a brand logo. You want to have something that represents the subject of the case study, subject matter of the case study. So in Amazon's case, we took a picture of this gorgeous old historic building that they had purchased or set up the rent for in Edinburgh. And that was better than having the person who was quoted a picture of them. Because this isn't really about people. This is really about business achievements, right? When we've done case studies on medical suppliers, then we've taken a picture of the product or put an image that is medical oriented. So that's the fast facts, and it should be right next to the first image that you put in on the front at the top of the first page of the case study.
We can't name names, but today's growth story is about $1 billion tech security firm. Even though this is an incredibly successful company, they've struggled with cross-selling among their top global clients through an underperforming inside sales team. So how did they solve for this? They implemented a multi-tactic program that included display, email, direct mail, global inside sales, and an enablement team. This program guaranteed pipeline conversions and resulted in a 257% increase in MQL to SQL conversion and an almost 200% increase in closed business. So how did this security firm get these kind of jaw-dropping results? The answer is simple. MRP Prolitics. MRP Prolitics is an insights-powered account-based marketing platform with streaming predictive analytics baked into its core. Integrating multi-channel ABM execution on these insights, MRP Prolitics triggers display, email, direct mail, and global inside sales in real time, helping the largest marketing departments in the world deliver the right message to their customers at just the right time. So can MRP Prolitics get similar results for you? Probably. Find out by visiting mrpfd.com or click the link in the episode description of this interview. All right, let's get back to the show. Okay, so we've got fast facts that need to be included as an additional element. The next one we're going to talk about is a sidebar. Talk to us about this one.
Yeah, so a sidebar is usually, again, on the first page. And this is really the commissioning company giving their highlights, their summary points. So say with UK Trade and Investment, it would talk about UK Trade and Investment. It would have some details about what different services UK Trade and Investment offered. And then it would have a how to get in touch. And about 7 years ago, we started putting in social media links, not just websites, but also the Twitter and the Facebook and LinkedIn links. Those would go in there right on the front of this two-sided PDF.
Got it. All right. So we've got fast facts. We've got a sidebar. This next one is called a box out. Talk to us about this one.
Right. So the box out is usually the last thing on the study. And this is where the commissioning company gets their focus on who they are and what they do and what they offer. And it's say a paragraph or two in a shaded box, just a simple rectangle. Same for the sidebar, except slightly different shape. And they expose what they do, and it then has the golden call to action to say, if you need our services, this is how you can get in touch. Now, if you're talking about a digital copy, you can provide a link that would lead to a landing page or lead to a website. If you're talking about the hard copy that you might take to an event or salespeople might take out into the field generally, and then you would want either a phone number or an email address. And at this point, you could probably put the name of someone in charge if there is somebody who is in charge of the particular services or products on offer.
Got it. Okay. So fast facts, sidebar, box out. The next one that we're going to talk about is design. I, firsthand understand the importance of design. And if this thing looks like something a fourth grader put together, it is not going to be well received. Talk to us about some design elements that people need to be looking out for when they're creating case studies.
Right. So as I say, it needs to look good. It needs to look professional. This is the bottom of the marketing funnel into the sales funnel, as we said above. And so you're going to want an actual designer to set this up. We've already said that there are certain blocks. So we would have the image blocks with the fast facts next to it. We'd have the sidebar along the side, usually the right-hand side of the first page of the PDF. And you've got the box out at the end. So all of this needs to be shaped out properly. And where the text goes is usually best done in the middle of all of this in columns. So I've done case studies with 2 columns, but I think the preferred design is 3 columns, almost like a newspaper. Because if you want people to be able to read it fast, 4 or 5 words a line, which is what the columns restricts you to, that's the best design for it. And it's important. This is one thing that I'm particularly OCD about, is it's very important to try and remove as many hyphens and hyphenated words as possible. So when I'm going through the editing and I'm coming through, I want to make sure, especially on the name of the company, that I don't want it to be AMA hyphen and then the next line Zon. I want Amazon to be a full word, right? And the same for UK Trade and Investment, which is a bit more of a mouthful. It's a longer phrase. At least the first time that UK Trade and Investment was mentioned, we always wanted that to be on one line as best as possible. Because if you want that name recognition, don't split the name up. That's something to be considered, is not just the design of the colors and the images and the shapes and sizes of the different box outs and sidebars, but you also want to consider the design of the text. And that brings us actually to the next thing that we're going to talk about, the titles and the subtitles.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So you want a catchy title, and you want subtitles that aren't just problem, solution, results. Problem, solution, results, when you're writing 6 or 20 or however many case studies you're going to prepare as the commissioning company over time, you want something a little bit more interesting than that. So off the top of my head, it might be how UK Trade and Investment helped Amazon land in Europe. That might be a title for the whole case study. Then you would have, Lost in the UK. That might be a subtitle for the problem section, because that's what their problem was. You want to describe it a little bit. So because you don't want repetition between case studies, and because you want this is a story, this is very formal, but the subtitles have a little bit of a personality to them.
Got it. Okay, so the next one we're going to touch on is quotations. Where do you want to put quotations? Who are these from the client? Talk to us about the quotations.
Yes. So as I said before, that the case study isn't about an individual person. So it's not about how somebody got promoted. You don't want to use an image of a person for the main image up front. But where the person comes in is the quotation. So what I like to do, again, within this column format, the 700 to 800 words of the case study story, you should have a couple of paragraphs per section, and then one paragraph with a long quotation. So it might be a sentence, comma, close quotation, says Joe, and then you use their full name and their full title the first time, and then subsequent times you might just use says Joe. But the first time you include says Joe, CEO of X company, Inc., whatever it is. And the quotations are full of quotations because that's where the person, and really it's the social proof, it's the confirmation that the first 2 paragraphs about the client exposing the problem, about the relationship, and then about the experience and the results achieved. Each of those, you want that confirmation in the words of the client. Now, I will say as a case study writer, this is something companies should note, is that not every client has the best English. And when we'll talk about this just before we finish off, I think, is how to get this information. But when you speak to the people, they might say, oh, it was great. That was great. And that thing that happened there was great. Well, it's not going to make a great case study to write great, 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 great. Okay. So you might want to play around with it a little bit and paraphrase, but that leads me to telling you that most case studies, you get the information on a 20 to 40 minute phone call or which is done in the format of an interview, questions and answers that fall into the sections that we described that will appear in the case study. So you'll ask them about their company and their background and the growth they've experienced. You'll ask them about the problem. You'll ask them about how did they come to meet the solution provider, be it UK Trade Investment, SmartLink, or PathGather, in my experience. And having done that, you will have a lot of their words, but you need to paraphrase it a little bit. Unless you have a very eloquent interviewee, you're usually going to have to paraphrase it a bit. But, and this is the final step to publishing the case study, is I believe every case study needs the consent of both parties who are being featured in the case study. You don't want to publish something that the other person is going to come back and say, hey, I didn't say that, or I'm not happy with how you paraphrased what I said. So they always have a chance to review. And this is what makes case studies take quite a long time to prepare. If you're writing a case study in a week, you're probably skipping some steps. Most case studies take between 4 weeks and 12 weeks to really produce. And that includes requesting and asking somebody if they're going to want to be featured in a case study, doing the interview. And, usually if you've got somebody worth featuring the case study, they're busy, as we said before. So you've got to make sure you find a good time for the interview. Then the writer has to go away and turn it into a case study. Then the editor should come in. These are things that are high level, so you should have an editor involved. And make sure not just the formal languages, the formal formatting and language of the case study, but also to ask questions like, and why is that relevant? And what happened next? You skipped a step. And making sure that everything flows beautifully. And then it will go to the client for review. Then it will come back, and the client may have had some objections or might want something pulled out, or might want something put in that wasn't mentioned in the interview that they thought about later, or a result they've achieved since the interview. So they may go through another round of writing and editing. And then it would go to everyone. Once it's gone into design, it would go to everyone for their consent. That's the best way to have a case study that is beautifully prepared, is ready for the audience, and that both parties are happy with how it's turned out and happy for it to be shopped around, as I say, either on your website, through social media, as part of a sales enablement strategy, or at events.
And I think the interesting part is thinking about this case study as not just a tool for your sales team, but the fact that this case study could actually be a sales tool for your customer as well, I think is a really different way of looking at it that I don't know that a lot of people look at. And so by collaborating with your customer at that level, knowing that, hey, this is just as much a sales collateral piece for you, maybe not quite as much, but it can absolutely help you, get some awareness and bring in new business for you as well. I think that's super interesting. The last piece that I want to talk about in terms of like the additional elements to include in a case study is this 2 to 3 paragraph intro that you're going to use to almost like tease out what's in the case study. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So in the trade, we call it a précis. It's a French word, but basically it's a summary of most of the case study, leaving out a couple of, the juicier details perhaps, but it's a teaser, and it's a 2 to 3 paragraph version, usually of under 200 words, that tells the story without telling the story. And just like the fast facts do at an event, and if someone's downloading it, this is a way of introducing the PDF before the PDF actually happens. And because we're in marketing, I'll say that case studies are great for lead generation. So you don't necessarily gate your blogs. You don't necessarily gate your product announcements. In fact, I would recommend against both of those being gated content. But case studies are the sort of things that you can make the choice. Do I gate the content? Do I not gate the content? But because you have this précis where they've already shown, hey, I'm interested, and I don't mind this company having my email address because maybe I do want them to get in touch with me. It's a great way to tease out an email and do some lead generation that way as well.
Awesome. So you mentioned before, Moshe, that this case study should be a PDF. Why should it be a PDF?
Largely because it's going to appear in multiple forms. So it may be something to be downloaded and saved for later, print it out, read it on the train. We said busy executives, busy decision makers, you're trying to get their attention. You can't always get that during the workday. So you want them to try and save it as a file on their desktop or email it to themselves or something like that. And then when, it saves time for when you're printing them out for display at a conference or an event, or for a salesperson to take into the field. They're going to want to print it out, nice paper, thick paper, usually glossy because you've got an image involved or a photograph involved on there. And if you've gone to the effort of designing it with a professional designer, you're going to want to present it in the hard copy as best you can. So a PDF works in all different settings.
Awesome. Moshe, this has been fantastic. I feel like you've really delivered kind of a next level masterclass, if you will, on case study creation, the art behind it, the science behind it, why these things are so effective, how to get the most effectiveness out of it. If somebody listening to this, they want to stay connected with you, they want to learn more about Mamba Freelancer, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. They can come to the website, which is mambafreelancer.com. That's MAMBA freelancer.com. Or they could email me directly, MOSHE @mambafreelancer.com. And I would be happy to respond and more than happy to write, help people prepare great case studies for their business.
Wonderful. I love it. Well, Moshe, thank you so much for your time today. This is fantastic. If you're listening to this, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to Moshe. We had a call a couple of weeks ago, and he blew my mind with his insight and intellect, but can communicate in a way that a dummy like me can understand kind of the concepts that he's sharing. So definitely reach out, take him up on his offer. And Moshe, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, James. And you're no dummy, believe me.
Thanks a lot, man.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.